Alrighty, right. Hello, guys.
Hey,
Hey,
How are you?
pretty good. It's a momentous day.
yeah,
It is.
it's been a
Yeah.
big day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome back to the Hotspot. It's been a minute. My name is Arman. I'm here with Matt and James, both of whom need no introduction in their own ways, but also we should probably give an introduction. So, in order of seniority, why don't you go first, James, and then Matt, just say a little
All
bit
right,
about yourself and what your involvement has been in helium.
sure. Well, by my day job, I run a consumer product business named Zest, but my background before that was in finance and venture, and been involved with crypto dating back to, I was arbitrage trading XRP in 2013, and then got involved with Ethereum in 2014. On and off, got involved with certain utility projects. And then one day I came across helium. It was actually Fred Wilson's blog. He wrote about it, and that was August or September 2019. And I sort of FOMO'd into one unit, and then the next day I woke up and I was like, the economics seem pretty cool for that. And like, it seems profitable. Bought like 10 more. And then before my first unit arrived, I think I had like 50 or 60 on order. So, along with Arman, we built some of the first sort of national, I would say, networks of IoT devices separately, but we got to know each other doing that. And so I had devices in maybe a dozen cities by early 2020 or late 2019. After deploying those, started to get more and more involved with the governance. Had, you know, were big parts of the debate dating back to HIP 10, which I know Armin remembers, and the battle that was HIP 10, and then rightly recognized that I was probably on the wrong side of that now, and HIP 10 was a great HIP, and maxing the one-to-one rewards for data transfers was smart. And then really got involved with HIP 20. Again, Arman was involved with that, and that was the max cap and net issuance, and laid the foundation for a lot of the halving schedules and stuff like that.
Yeah. Before that, HNT had unlimited supply, 5 million
Yeah,
per month into infinity. So that
yeah,
Oh,
was
I
a big
did
one.
not know that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Most people don't know
yeah.
that.
If you ask Amir, who's like, yeah, I want to do like 50 million at first or something crazy like that. Maybe it's not that crazy with all these projects. We're in projects with Sub-DAOs that have 280 billion and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was sort of an infinite system, and I started to push the idea of okay, how can we make these economics sustainable in the long run, but also something that people can sort of invest based on sort of known quantities, and that's where net emissions and max cap came out of. And what else? I got involved with some other stuff. I was the controversial leader behind HIP 39, which was the redenomination HIP that originally had Armin's support and then very quickly didn't. But we made amends. That didn't go through. In some ways, it got incorporated into some of the later HIPs, but then I started proposing another HIP that created the protocol score system that was sort of the basis of the multi-network system. Like we called it Omni Network or something like that back then. And then that got me pulled into HIP 51 to work on, how that would sort of integrate into the larger governance system of the sub-DAOs. So was an author in 51, 52. And then I was burnt out and, stayed somewhat involved, but took a hiatus here as we were talking about before we got on. And then, started to get re-involved on the governance side recently. And then, Fairby was nice enough to bring me into the loop and he was really the leader of the charge on this, what was it called before, HIP 666 or issue 666 or whatever he called it. And looks like it's going to be HIP 138 or something thereabouts. So I've been helping think through how to make that a more appetizing HIP for the various communities, and how to get the vote pushed through. So yeah, that's my long-winded involvement with helium over the years.
Basically, what James is trying to say is that he has a PhD in helium.
I have a PhD in a very particular part of helium, which I guess is what PhDs do, right? That's very
Economics,
particular niche. Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
It's funny because through a couple of proxies, I've become sort of a student of all that. So
yeah, the teacher.
It's nice to be
the student and the teacher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Still learning.
How did you originally get involved, Matt? Because I'm sure your story is quite different than James's.
Incredibly different. I came in as part of the viral wave of people that joined in during the beginning of 2021, April of 2021 specifically. If you look at Google Trends, people looking into helium, flat, April 21. It shoots right up. I got into it through Ethereum mining, actually. We were all kind of locked down looking for stuff to do. And so I'm like, I just got a new GPU. Let's try this thing. My buddy's been telling me about Ethereum for years. So started with that, and on a channel that talked about mining, building mining rigs, all that other stuff, this guy showed he had a OG helium hotspot and said, I'm making $200 a week or something like that. The rest is history.
The good old days.
Yeah. So, I guess I also should have a little introduction. Hi, my name is Matt. You guys probably know me as Trim from the Discords. I'm one of the moderators on two of the prominent helium Discords. For a while, I was just that guy who sat in the Discords trying to learn what was what, because it all seemed really exciting, but I didn't really know why. And so I badgered Joe Crypto Utility every time there was a scammer on the other server, and one day he just got kind of tired of it and said, all right, you're a mod now, have at it. And so the rest is kind of history. And I kind of learned everything from the likes of Chris Farabee, Siegfried, and whatnot, and then I learned about the famed JMF equation, and sort of a student of all that, and that sort of got me really, really plugged in. And I don't think I've been away from the Discord since. And I've been deploying hotspots and checking Dune and the stats page and all that since, and just sort of trying to articulate the things I've been taught to everybody else who's trying to learn. So that's been sort of my mission in all this, and it's been a wild ride so far.
Don't get me wrong. Even when I was checked out on the Discord on a daily basis, I was still checking Dune and every other metric every goddamn day. So there's no avoiding that. That's just how the addiction goes, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you can do the community stuff only so much, but you'll never let go of the data. You always want to know.
Sweet refresh.
I've run out of credits so many times.
Yeah, I got that Helium Foundation team plan, so I just ripped all those credits on the refreshes. Don't tell anybody.
Perks.
By the way, what does Trim mean? Why is the M capital? I have so many questions.
It's my initials. My mom used to call me Triple M, and I used to be a DJ, and I was looking for a new DJ name, so I'm like, and we happened to be listening to an Eminem track in the car, and I'm like, what about 3 M's? Triple M. That's what my mom calls me. Trim.
I love it. I love a good story behind a name.
Mine is also my initials.
Yeah.
Somehow I'm permanently known as JMF. That was not intentional, but come to appreciate it.
Yeah, mine is a nickname my friend made up for me in high school, Arman, which is also just basically a pun on my name with a little bit of finesse, a little bit of fierceness in there. So I guess we have a topic to discuss. A pretty large proposal has been dropped, and the main author of the proposal, unfortunately, is not here. I was going to reach out to him, but I realized that he's definitely asleep due to time zones. And there were very few times that I could actually record and cover this. So we're here. We're going to talk about the reversion to HNT, HIP 666, as it was originally called, although I'm sure it's going to get a real HIP number soon. And
The HIP
it's all
formerly
about,
known HIP formerly known as 666.
yes, a HIP 130 something, probably 8,
Yeah.
9, maybe 140 for symbolic purposes, a nice roundish number. It's a big one. And so Chris is the main author on it, and it's all about basically returning to a single token. So this is a topic that's been sort of in discussion for a long time. It has come up over and over and over, but no one really put it pen to paper until Farabee did, and he took many weeks to sort of iterate on it with the community and then turn it into this formal proposal. And he added yourself, James, and Abai as co-authors. So I guess, James, do you want to talk a little bit about what your involvement is here, just to contextualize, then we can dive into actually
Sure.
the HIP itself?
Sure. Yeah. So I admittedly came pretty late into the process when we were, I was reading a lot about the discussion. As Arman knows, I think we got to a point where we realized we got to figure out a path forwards with what we're going to do with mobile and IoT and HNT. And there was a lot of discontent among, the mobile crowd as prices continue to decline, and then IoT as it's sort of started to swap. And, there's a lot of discussion about how do you provide more utility to the Sub-DAO tokens. And, I started on the crowd of, well, is there a way of strategically providing demand side burn to boost mobile and IoT? And that, I think the first thing I started to realize is politically toxic as far as the politics of helium go. There was a lot of the crowd and the powers that be and the very verbal and as very, well-known people within the community were of the opinion, the moment you break that sacred rule of all demand side burn goes through DCs, you open up the floodgates. What's going to happen in the future? Are you going to take more burn away from HNT? How can investors possibly analyze this? A lot of the conversation was with institutional investors. They would say it becomes uninvestable because you don't understand what, the future of that's going to be. So, my first realization was, okay, that's probably impossible to get through. And then it became more and more seeing their side of the argument and realizing, okay, that becomes a dangerous road to go down. And I can see why it, I'm a guy that, likes structure when it comes to economics as much as we can, which, that should be apparent from HIP 20 and all that. And so I started to realize I was sort of going against my own ideals with this, breaking of the sacred rules kind of thing. So, I came around to the idea of, okay, the true path forward is a return to simplicity and a return to focusing the community on the growth of the underlying network, which has been incredible, but in many ways overshadowed by this constant debate of, value, where the value is going between the sub-DAOs. And the one way to do that is, is returning to a singular token of HNT. I was involved with the creation of the multiple tokens. I had to look at it and say, okay, I think a lot of HIP 51 through 53 was really great. Created great governance, created the protocol score, created the concept of a network of networks. But we probably overreached with the multiple tokens. It got really complex really quickly when the Genesis token distribution of mobile got to some massive number, 50 billion or something like that. And IoT started trading almost immediately at swap pretty quickly, and discontent around that, and sort of the slow trend of mobile towards its own swap. And it has this really big hole to dig out of because of the Genesis tokens. So I had to admit, look, we probably screwed up there. And we couldn't foresee everything that happened, but the best thing going forwards is let's look at the network. What's the best way forwards? I think the community and the greater crypto community has been pretty vocal that the system has gotten too damn complex. And even talking to some institutional investors, we were hearing things like, man, we can't invest in that because I'd have to put an analyst on it for a month to understand those to a point of, being investable. You don't have to go to that kind of depth as a retail investor, but those guys do. And, the favoring complexity over simplicity begs the question of what are they going to, do next with this? And what kind of complexity is that going to add? And is it going to get more and more distracted? Is the value going to go to HNT? Is it going to go to these sub-DAO tokens? All these things that are big what ifs that I think just continued to degrade at the sentiment of the community. So, I reached out to Chris and was talking to Abe separately about it, and, said, I think there's something here. I think we should push this now. And, Chris had done an awesome job laying the foundation for it. But, I think we need to make this as positive of a change as possible. We need everybody to come out of this saying, okay, this is the right way forward. We're all on the same team. We're united. And nobody feels screwed that's not willing to feel a little screwed. I'll get into the HST side because that came with the backing of a lot of HST holders. So, we devised this idea of, okay, well, under original 666 or V3, even the HST holders were going to get a 50% distribution, and then they were going to get a 50% haircut on future earnings, and that was going to go into the community. And then we sort of politicked our way, and they were very open to this because they wanted simplicity too of, are you guys willing to concede all future earnings? And if so, can we sweeten the pot for this conversion and make it more positive? So, that was a lot of my involvement of, okay, how do we make this more appetizing? And then once we had something that we thought was ready for the community, my job became, okay, go live in, the Discord channels and, go talk to people like you and try to get the word out there and make sure the community understands the full picture, how it differs from V3, how it differs from the original 666, what are the complaints? How can we tweak it? Which we're literally about to post the updated HIP, sometime tonight or something that has the recommendations that came in. And I think we did an awesome job of bringing the community together around a few amendments that, I think switched over a lot of naysayers and mostly clarified, what our goal was here. And I think everybody agrees that simplicity is better. It's better for the capital markets. It's better for people trying to understand the system. And frankly, the increase in rewards going to Wi-Fi miners is a massive boon because, that's where we're in some way staking the future of the network. And, under the current model, the emissions to devices or to miners is less than half of what it would be under an HNT solidified model. So, that's again a long-winded version of how I got involved with this, and what my focus has been, coming on as a late add to what was already a pretty robust proposal.
Right,
yeah, no,
right.
that was great. That was a great intro.
Yeah, really thorough. One question, just want to go back a little bit. If you could, would you be able to elaborate just a little bit on why the idea of multiple tokens was introduced in the first place? Because there are some people who still question that one.
Sure. Yeah, I think two of us on here questioned it a little bit at the time as well. But it was a group project in a lot of ways, and what we thought was the best ideas, one at the time. A lot of it came down to how do we cement this idea of semi-autonomous rule over of the sub-DAOs. And, a way of making that, I think, very clear was that they would have their own token. Was that necessary in hindsight? Probably not. Did we think that it was going to trade above swap? For sure. And mobile still does trade above swap, which has some advantages. One of the things I don't think, looking back, kind of dumb, but is I guess I didn't realize this period of miners actually being undercompensated while you're over swap compared to just getting HNT through the protocol score system. So there was these things that I think were blown up in our minds at that time. And, some people, myself included, still like the idea of having a higher token count so that mining could be in whole numbers and larger numbers and that kind of stuff. So that was part of it. And this was a way of, kind of doing a redenomination without doing a redenomination. And so,
and
I think
just
it
a little
came down to
history.
cementing those concepts or cementing the semi-autonomous rule. But in hindsight, you can do that with sub-DAOs without, having the complexity of additional tokens. Sorry, go ahead, Arman.
Yeah, just to explain some of the history there, the idea behind redenomination is that HNT doesn't have enough tokens, basically. It's like 200 something million. And the original redenomination idea was like, let's just 1000x, basically do a 1000 to 1 split because people like bigger numbers, was basically the rationale. And I do think there's a good psychology element to that. So one thing that was appealing about going to these new tokens was like, hey, this very contentious redenomination concept that would be very difficult to do with an existing token, we can do it if we do new tokens. And as James said, there are a bunch of other, there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There were a fair amount of people who wanted the tokens to happen. I think James and I at various times were speaking up against the idea of the tokens. I know I at least was like, hey, can't we just do all of this with HNT? It just seems simpler. It seems easier. And I think it's just like a collective decision-making thing. However, for whatever reason, it turned out that the ideas of tokens won out, of new tokens won out. And I don't know if there was necessary, like there was a lot of thought that went into it. I think for someone like me at the time, I didn't feel confident enough in a room full of people who were ostensibly very qualified on economic subjects, or at least I felt that they were more confident than I was about the economic things. I'm just in here making stuff up. I don't know why you guys invited me. It's cool to be here. I don't know if I contributed all that much to that conversation other than naming the tokens, which I will have as my claim to fame.
You can put it on your business card. It's what hills that you're going to die on. And I think, I probably came around to the multi-token idea. I remember talking about the complexity of it, but, I think for Arman, it wasn't definitely wasn't a hill he was willing to die on fighting that. And for me, I think I was convinced enough that I wasn't going to fight it. And that's the nature of these big, hairy proposals, that a lot of stuff gets thrown out, and a lot of the ideas are good. And given how complex and hairy HIP 131 or 51 through 53 were, it's sort of amazing that most of it works pretty well.
Well, yeah, that is a pretty good rundown of how the current system works. I've spent a significant amount of time explaining that to people, and I think wanting to simplify that is even from somebody who's like I said, I spend a good portion of my day when I'm in the Discords explaining how something works, or a good way to look at a particular issue, like why is there a treasury, why 3 tokens, etc. And I got to admit, there's a part of me that's going to wonder if, if and when we do revert, what am I going to do?
There'll be plenty, for sure. But
I'm sure. Yeah.
like Telegram, that's all people talk about on that Telegram channel. And I remember again dating back to HIP 10, which was the maxing out rewards for data transfer at 1-to-1 to the cost. That Arman and everybody else and myself and everybody was like, okay, very openly, because it was sort of anticipated, and the team didn't really fight it, of like, oh, like, how are we going to game this to spam as much data at the IoT devices, at the LoRaWAN devices, to effectively create as much spam data as possible, because there was going to be an excess reward on that. And Armin sort of pulled me aside. We had probably Slack back then or something, or said it in the community Slack, and was just like, why are all the most involved minds with this project focusing on how to cheat the system, and how to and how to create these spam systems? And I remember discussions of like, okay, well, if we create spam at this rate, it overfloods the devices, versus if you do it at a very slow, consistent. And like my brother, who's like a dual electrical and biomedical engineer, he's like putting all of his mind share into figuring out how to send as much fake data to these devices. And as soon as Armin said that, I was just like, what the hell are we doing? This is not what the network's about. And that's what I was in the Telegram group again the other day, and I was like, we're literally only discussing people complaining about the 3-token system. And meanwhile, everything we've been dreaming about as a network is happening. There's this massive growth of this token DC burn, and we're hitting 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. We just hit a new high like yesterday or something like that. And Amir's talking about they want to hit 10,000 with it. So it's like all happening, and nobody's talking about it because we're all friggin' distracted by this.
Yeah, I'm
dumb
really glad you
complaints
brought
here.
that
So
up, because I was just about to say one of the reasons why a token reversion is good is because it gets everybody focusing on something other than the freaking tokens. And it may be back to building the network, which just gets everybody to the place we all want to be anyway. There was somebody recently who said, if I have to hear somebody talking about the floor price one more time, I'm out. I'm just leaving. I don't want to talk about the floor one more time, because that's all anybody talks about all day, every day, is the floor. And they
and
just want to
it
put up
just
hotspots.
we just need to be over with it. It needs to be done, and we just need to get back to simplicity, focusing on accruing value to one place that everybody can understand. It doesn't. People are talking about the death of the network of networks. It's like, no, it doesn't. All of that, the tokens are just sort of a facade on top of that. It's not what actually allows any of that to be the case. And it's just been a distraction for everybody, which I think most of the community, especially after today's conversations, I think recognize that, or at least generally agree that confusion and complexity are generally bad for the system.
Yeah, well, another thing that's been coming up more and more lately are all sorts of harebrained schemes to sort of shift value around or do short-term pump schemes. And I think a few people recognize that as soon as we start talking about these things, like you mentioned earlier, once you start breaking down the walls, it's like, where do we even go from there? And so
I thought I was
some
going to
new
go
schemes have
crazy
been coming
today.
up. Yeah, there
How
have
do
been
we turn
two
this into a
particular schemes
meme
coming up
token?
lately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if one
yeah.
more person brings up how to turn mobile into a meme token, I'm going to go nuts. We have one of the few projects that has prided itself and is recognized as like a real world project that's doing something cool in the real world and becoming successful at it. And it's like, oh, let's throw away all of our credibility and just follow the latest trend because we want to be the mother token or whatever, doll in hat. Like, it's great. Those things have done well. Broke the 1 in a million model, and they've had, they won the lottery. Let's not bet one of the few great networks on becoming one of those. Let's actually keep doing what we're doing well.
I echo everything you guys just said. Like, the network growth is amazing. we have real demand from great customers, and it's growing basically exponentially if you look at the data chart, which I know we all refresh multiple times a day, as we've discussed. And we are sitting here talking about like market rate versus floor price. And every time this comes up, I'm just like, nobody outside of the 12 people who talk about this over and over and over every week probably even understand what that means. And we've layered so much complexity on top of a thing that's already arguably very complex. I mean, there's a lot of different things to understand about helium and the way that it works. There's the supply side, there's the demand side, there's the blockchain, there's telecom in general, there's the incentives of different parties in the network, there's data pricing. I mean, there's just so many fruitful topics to discuss, and I'm just seeing a lot of brain cycles being wasted here. I do want to continue lingering on like what's the problem? Like why is this coming about? Because I think we've covered a lot of it, but I think it really behooves us to help people understand why the community would propose something like this. Because I think it's very easy to look at it on the surface and say, wow, they've made a lot of mistakes, right? They've launched these tokens and now they're trying to take them back. Like, what are they doing? But at the same time, as one of the oldest community members, we have to do this. This is something that is so critical, I think, to the future of everything that we want to accomplish. It's going to reduce the amount of brain cycles needed by everyone in the community to just continue to build the damn thing, which is something I think we do very well when we're focused on network growth, on growth of demand sources and building the technical sides of things. And I have felt a definitive shift away from those things, even though this is arguably the time when those things should be focused on the most. So the idea of sub tokens in general, right? The sub tokens they both had their own independent history, which we can maybe review a little bit. IOT launched during the Solana transition. Mobile launched before that. That caused a lot of sort of discrepancies with how much HNT went into the treasury for each one. Mobile was initially basically unbacked by HNT. And I'm just rehashing some of the details here that people who aren't like terminally online with this stuff probably don't know. Like, these are the types of initial conditions that led to where we are today. So we had a number of issues that came from how the tokens initially were launched. Mobile token was launched before the Solana transition, which happened in April 2023. And many tokens were emitted during a period called Genesis. And then IoT token was launched at the Solana transition, which was actually the first time that the HNT treasuries were actually implemented. So mobile token was unbacked before then. It is amazing, as James said earlier, like a lot of HIP 51 through 53 not only is still working today, but it survived the transition from a proprietary blockchain to Solana, and it actually worked better afterwards. So I think there was a lot of like the design was simple and elegant enough that it was technically implementable on Solana, which was awesome, especially considering that there was no foresight that we would have to necessarily transition off the Helium L1.
Well, anybody that remembers running the blockchain on the hotspots, the IoT hotspots from back in the day, will tell you it runs a hell of a lot better now. That you remember following, what was the website that we had that would show whenever it went down? And we get to track how many minutes since the last block went through, and God, that was awful.
I don't remember that, but I remember using BFG Neil's site to check to see if any of my hotspots needed port 4158 open, something like that.
Yeah, it might have post dated you, because they ended up centralizing it with the validators. Originally, the blockchain ran completely between the devices, and then they had the validators, and then we obviously moved to Solana, and that changed the entire system. Yeah, it's way better now.
The history of Helium is littered with things like this, where like we couldn't do the main thing because we had to focus on technical issues that were other than wireless networking, right? Mm-hmm. And now we have largely gotten rid of all the blocking technical issues, I would say. Technical progress is flowing like water now. We can develop so quickly on Solana. We can develop so quickly with our Oracle system. And all the other infrastructure like Passpoint is just so smooth.
In a way, the mind share we're losing from focusing on tokenomics almost reflects all the blockchain issues from way back when, because a lot of us are spending untoward amounts talking about tokens instead of building networks. And so it's almost like an echo in a way, just sounds a little different.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go with that, which is exactly right. It is evocative of those times. It's like the difference is in those times we had to depend on the devs to do something, and now we don't. We just have to we just have to kind of sort of rethink what our priorities are and whether we want to be focusing so much time on these economic issues, which it reminds me of like Ethereum ultrasound money type of just like we're over theorizing about the economics here, and really what we need is just a much simpler system. So like all of the issues that I was bringing up earlier about the IoT treasury and the mobile treasury, right? These are just things that I don't think almost anyone understands. And at a very basic level, we want a system that is understandable easily, which we had. I think that's another thing is like we know what we had. Like it was super simple when you just plugged in your miner and mined HNT, and that was the only thing. And I definitely find myself missing those days and sort of lamenting all of the complexity that we have wrought with the sub-network treasuries. So, I mean, that's a little bit of history and like how we got here and why I think this is important. We haven't even really gotten into the details of the proposal yet, but I just wanted to lay that groundwork. Any other thoughts you guys want to add? Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that a lot of this discussion has also been around like, oh, well, we did it. We might as well stick with it. You know, you guys are probably right, but like, is like that going to create confusion and people are not going to like switching back? And, you know, one of the things that it brings you back to is, have you guys ever read Chris Dixon's book, Read Write? Yeah, you know, Chris Dixon, A16Z, investor in Helium and all that. But he talks about the various types of organizations from highly centralized to highly decentralized. And one of the interesting things that he brings up that I think a lot about now is there's a lot of advantages to decentralization. One of the things that becomes more difficult is either pivoting or getting rid of something, because there's built-in interests and there's built-in incentives that, you know, people are willing, and you hear this sort of all the time, you know, and I think CBRS is a topic that's big on this right now of like, oh, well, like, you know, what should we do with CBRS if it's not really doing what we hoped it to do? And the devs behind it agree with that, and how Freedom Fi agrees with that. In a classic company, there would be a very centralized decision where they'd say, okay, let's move on. Let's focus on what's best for the company. And a decentralized system where you have people with all these different interests, you know, it's much harder to do that. And the major disadvantage that he talks about in that book is sometimes these not more centralized, but decisive decisions need to be made that might not be completely to the benefit of everybody in the community, but it's better for the network as a whole. And, you know, I hope that Helium, above most other communities, because there is such a focus on the long-term goal, what we want to do, is comfortable, you know, making these decisions that are best for the community and are best for driving us forward. I do think there is a larger crowd of people in Helium that are more interested in the long-term success of Helium than they are necessarily, oh, how does this small thing impact me in particular? And there's plenty of things that, you know, even with this hip, that, you know, do I wish that mobile token was trading at where it was in whatever, April? Yeah, but, you know, that's a sunk cost. That's gone. I think everybody realizes it's sort of trending towards swap. You know, I think it's great that Helium's going to get, or that mobile holders are going to get, you know, something that feels fair during this swap. But, you know, I'm not going to hold out hoping that, you know, we become a meme token or something like that and it goes back up to some insane price. What's more important to me is this is the right thing for the network. Let's move forwards with that. Let's not get too caught up in the past. And, I do hope that helium's able to break that, whatever you want to call it, tragedy in the commons or whatever you want to call that effect that, having too many cooks in the kitchen can cause consensus building to be more important than decisive action, especially when decisive action is needed.
Are you able to elaborate, just for some people who might not know who are watching, the difference between the swap rate and the rate on the market, and possibly why there's been sort of a long slide since March or April of this year? Because
Yeah.
I like to tell people that it's essentially unsupported. That you hear this term all the time. Oh, it's just physics, which doesn't make a lot of sense to most people. But I've been explaining to a lot of people that this is sort of something that was bound to happen because mobile's been in a bubble, and in some ways, it's actually kind of encouraging that there was so much hype that things ran up so hard, but some people only see the trend and they don't understand why. So I was wondering, do you think you could elaborate a little bit on why the trend is trending?
Yeah. I think even in crypto where spirit animals, run wild with a lot of projects, eventually inherent value of something, comes back and, rears its sometimes ugly, sometimes beautiful head. And in the case of helium as a whole, I think we all, hope that people recognize the underlying value that's happening. But in the case of mobile, there was that big run up. I think people were holding out that there would be all these, creative mechanisms for, driving more burn to mobile itself and all these kind of things. And then, people started to really recognize, okay, here is there's a swap rate, which is how much HNT helium is in the treasury versus how many of the sub tokens have been issued in total. And if you just divide the total number of issued sub tokens divided by the total treasury, that's the swap rate. And that's the rate you can go to the treasury and in a programmatic way, swap your Sub-DAO tokens for helium. And so that creates the underlying value of the Sub-DAOs is the token should not trade below that, because if it does, people will just arbitrage it and trade the token back up to whatever that swap rate is.
That's the floor.
Yeah, that's
the floor
that
price.
we're always talking about.
And so as IoT started to fall behind on protocol score and the swap rate started to get worse for IoT, people pretty quickly realized, well, this is heading in a direction and it seems like it's going to continue to head in that direction. So I'm not going to be the last one out the door. Whenever it would trade above the swap rate, people would very quickly arbitrage that out and sell their tokens and trade it to HNT. For mobile, it's interesting because there is some level of forward pricing where, and this came into play when we were thinking about what is quote unquote fair for a mobile swap rate under this HIP. If you look forward, the swap rate, as in the amount of, again, the amount of mobile tokens versus the amount of HNT in the treasury, is improving. So the longer you wait, the more the swap rate improves for mobile. That being said, it's a relatively understandable curve. And there's going to be crap that happens, or another sub-DAO comes in that changes that entire equation. But you can look forward a little bit and say, okay, well, we're trading above swap floor today, but we're trading at or even a little bit below future swap floor. And therefore, if I'm going to hold helium anyways, I might as well hold this thing that's going to trend towards this slightly higher number. I think that we're finally getting there with the swap floor and that versus the swap price. But for a long time, the price was just at a range that it was never going to match the swap in the future. It was going to be ahead of that. And so I think people realized that more and more, and that sort of led to the token. And as that became more verbalized and more understood by people, there was people who were going to trade into that. And, not everybody needs to understand that for the market and the major players in the market to trade it that direction. So, that's why I am, don't have a ton of faith in, let's just see if it goes on another speculative run. Because at this point, there's enough dollars and enough of the miners and stuff like that realize how those economics work in the long run that, they look at it and they go, okay, well, we have a little bit of a speculative boost right now. I'm just going to trade into that as much as possible because I don't think that's going to hold. And that's a classic thing of when there's a major decline in the token, people trade into the, any kind of rise, and it tends to be difficult to break out of that.
When people see a trend, they think it's going to go forever.
Yeah. And so, that's where, when we talk about floor and swap prices and everything like that, that's how that comes into play. And when we thought about that with this, and we said, look, the IoT, community that swap rate is only going one direction for the foreseeable future. There's some awesome ideas out there that I'm trying to help with, to, bring up revenues in IoT and stuff like that I think might, help in the foreseeable but not immediate future. So they pretty predictably know that their swap rate's going to get worse and worse. Under this hit, they pretty much lock in their swap rate for current IoT holders. So that stops that decline for those holders. So there's pretty massive benefit. So you're not just sitting in a deflating in currency, at least against helium. Excuse me. That being said, price can continue to go up if HNT goes up, but you'd be better off sitting in HNT. So if you can lock that swap rate with HNT, at least you're not, you don't have the incentive to immediately swap to HNT and all that. With helium miners, we did out the curve a bit and said, okay, here's where it looks to be going. Here's the swap rate it looks to be going to, somewhere in that 7,000, maybe even a little bit higher, that 7,500 range, assuming no new sub-DAOs or anything comes in, which could have blown that swap rate up. And I think it's fair to the people holding mobile tokens who understand that to be compensated something in the range of where they expect that swap rate to be in the future. So that's why sort of some of these extra incentives around HST, effectively investor and team future distributions are going to go to that treasury to sort of get it up to closer to what they would expect in the future. But yeah, that's sort of a description of how we think about swaps and why swaps are so important. And, frankly, we went through a speculative phase, and if people are going to get stuck up on, oh, maybe that will happen again, I'm not willing to bet the network on that, a network that I find so important and so many people do. I want to, focus on what's important going forwards and realize that at the end of the day, economics are going to win out, even if they don't win. It's going to trend a certain direction once people understand how those token economics work, and we're seeing it happen right now, and I don't expect that to change.
It's just physics.
Yeah,
it's just. I mean, in a sense, it is. I mean, even if you ignore the swap rate, which is, I think, what the "it's just physics" thing refers to, is right. Like, it'll always come down to the floor. Just simple, basic tokenomic analysis applies here. You started out with a supply of let's say 30 billion tokens as of the Solana transition that were actually out there, something around there.
Unbacked
by anything. So the swap rate wasn't even something that was even in the discussion, right? I mean, on day one of the Solana transition, that's when HNT first went into the mobile network's treasury, making it have a swap rate, and it was something crazy like 1 to a million, right, or something like that. And also, like, just the amount of tokens that existed then versus now, the token has seen 3 to 4x inflation. We're minting 78 million mobile tokens a day. When you have such a big run up, there weren't nearly as many tokens circulating back then as there are now. So
yeah, it's still pretty early in the token's life cycle.
It's early in the token's life cycle, and a lot of new tokens are being minted, and unless there are people to buy those new tokens, at least as many new tokens as are minted every day price goes down. That's just pretty basic. And to summarize kind of what James was saying, if you're currently holding IoT, you may not know this, but it's worth less HNT every single day, right? It is not good to hold IoT, basically, in my opinion. You would want to swap all the IoT that you get every single day. If the ratio of HNT going into the treasury versus IoT is not favorable to you, there's a lot of IoT inflation, whereas the amount of HNT going to the treasury is going down because that HNT is now going to the mobile treasury because of the sub-network utility score. If you're holding mobile token, you are currently, so the swap rate as of today is about 1 to 14,000. So you can trade 14,000 mobile for an HNT. The market trades above that, and that is going up every single day. So if you're holding mobile token, the minimum price it can be worth in HNT is technically more and more every single day because of basically the opposite reason of why IoT is going down. Suffice it to say that I really strongly believe that people shouldn't even have to know that these mechanisms exist. It should just be, if you have the token, you have the token. It's just far too complicated. Creating all that context to say, I want to dive into the details of this HIP, because what's proposed here is essentially a solution that attempts to not make anyone feel like they were wronged, and create a graceful path to rolling back the IoT and mobile tokens. So one aspect, first of all, I just want to preface by saying, like, nobody can take your tokens. This is a decentralized network. Like, the tokens are built on an SPL token program on Solana. So the whole idea of rolling back tokens is not, I'm sure some people will hear that and they're like, oh, they're going to take our tokens. No. That is just simply impossible. You cannot take your tokens out of your wallet. What is going to happen is basically the continuation of what already exists. So right now you have these treasuries, right, for IoT and mobile that you can redeem to HNT. When this proposal goes live, or at a certain date, what will happen is that HNT will stop going into the treasuries. So the rate of swap for IoT and mobile will essentially freeze at some point. And from then on into the future, you will be able to redeem your mobile and IoT tokens for HNT at that rate. Now, there are details around what the distribution schedule of HNT into the treasuries is after certain dates, and we can get into all of that. But I just wanted to lay the basic groundwork of the idea of rolling back to one token is not about deleting tokens, which is not a possible thing to do. It is about creating a fair off-ramp for everybody involved to, on their own time frame, voluntarily swap back to HNT, which is the token where all the value will be driven going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You nailed it. And the swap rate locks in, IoT tokens, hopefully in the very soon future, so that there isn't a consistent, ongoing decline. So it benefits them, and the swap rate under the system is better than what the mobile token is trading at today. So there's actually sort of a built-in premium for the mobile token holders. So it's sort of a no-brainer on their end. And I've got to give credit where credit is due, where a lot of this comes back to, you don't hear this very often in crypto projects or anywhere, the selflessness of the team and the investors, and being willing to stop emissions. So they have something called HST, helium security tokens, that they get a certain percentage of all the tokens distributed for infinity. And that rate goes down year over year, but right now about 31% of tokens go to these investors and go to the team. It's their way of compensating for their investment, and it's like equity in a company. So they've already earned quite a bit of the total sort of token distribution they'll likely ever see, but there's still a meaningful percentage out there. And they said, at least a meaningful number of them have said, we are in support of this idea. We want to support the network, and we want to support this move towards simplicity. So, we're going to allow you to stop distributing these tokens to us and redirect it in the best way possible to the network. So it's not like we are it's not magic here. It's one party sort of sacrificing for the larger good. We are also minting some additional new tokens. I should say they're tokens that were supposed to be minted already that didn't get minted after HIP 20 and since then. And we've decided to put those unallocated tokens to use in a way that makes this swap all the more appealing. And it has a very small dilution effect on HNT as a whole. It's like 2%, not even. While it massively makes this whole process a lot more tenable and digestible for all parties involved. And again, we want this to be something that everybody comes out of united and happy with. And, you know, the sentiment of the project being, we're back to the basics. We're doing an awesome job under the cover. Let's stop, you know, BSing about all these, you know, things that are supposed to be features, but have become, you know, the focus of the product. And just generally everybody feeling good about this move. So, you know, I think there's, you know, we're not doing anything magic. We're strategically redistributing tokens from parties and from groups that are allowing us to do so, which I think speaks a lot about them, and it speaks a lot about their faith in the network and their hope that the network continues to succeed.
I think that's a point that needs to be stressed, and it's a sector that I think most people weren't completely aware of. For the last year or so, we would speculate on what it would take to roll back to a single token. And everybody, you know, you think about it for however long and you realize you can't without somebody somewhere losing value. Either mobile would have to come down the floor, or you would have to do something else with HNT, or a third party would have to come in and inject some liquidity into the system in order to bring everything into alignment. And nobody had considered essentially doing something with the HSD emissions, because it was sort of taken for granted that, oh, the original investors, the people who created the project, have some form of equity in the project. And it is quite momentous, in my opinion, that is essentially sort of the crux of a lot of this, that they're saying, no, let's right the ship. We will forego those earnings and just chart a path forward. Let's go.
Yeah. It's not only investors, it's literally Amir and the early employees and Nova, the organization, the original Helium. Like, those guys are, I think, a third of the HST. Like, it's pretty amazing that they made this concession.
Yeah. It's a really big concession.
I mean, on one in one sense, it's amazing, and in another sense, it is just common sense, because HST is getting somewhere between, like, I think 25 and 30% of all the emissions right now. You might have the exact number in your head.
31.
30. There you go. 31% of all HNT emissions are going to HST holders. But something like 70+% of all the HNT that will ever be minted has already been minted anyway. So, you know, they're looking at already having almost all of the HNT that they will ever have, or at least, you know, over 70% of it. And if you put yourself in their shoes, it's like, yeah, you could get the additional 30%, or, you know, you could sacrifice that to create a more valuable whole. And with the way that crypto markets work, 30% is not much of a move, I would say. I would much rather have 30% less of something that was worth twice as much, for example, which I think also is a very modest move in crypto terms. So in my opinion, this is an entirely logical choice by the HST holders. It is a one-off thing that can't be repeated, that they're going to do to build, that they're willing to entertain in order to maintain goodwill and distribute value where it is basically best put to service. I think those emissions are going to go to good use, not in their hands, but I also don't think it was, you know, bad that it was going to the initial equity investors in the project either. It is good to have your investors aligned. I want to dig a little bit into the exact details here. One of the things that I really appreciate about this HIP is it's just, like, really clear. It's really well written. which a lot of HIPs aren't. And so much props to all the authors, but especially Chris Farabee, who led the charge here, and I know was iterating a lot to get this language clear. Due to intricacies of the way things have played out with the mobile network treasury, we have this sort of catch-up effect going on right now, where the value of the HNT that's going into the treasury in order to raise that floor price every day is significantly higher than the value of the new mobile tokens that are minted every day. So what that means is the mobile tokens, right? This is the token that rewards the discovery mappers, the hotspots for proof of coverage and for data transfer, and also rewards service providers and oracles. I don't think we're emitting that right now, but basically all the rewards for the mobile network come in mobile token, right? If you take the USD value of that mobile token that's emitted every single day as of today, and you compare it to the USD value of the HNT that's going into the mobile treasury, it's something like 2 or 3x difference. So basically what that means is, as for this first point in the proposal, as far as the mobile subnetwork specifically is concerned, all of the miners on discovery mappers would start to receive HNT every single day instead of mobile token, and overnight the amount of HNT that they would mine would be worth 2 to 3x in dollar terms as compared to what they're mining now. So I think that's a huge point, a huge benefit of this proposal is just increased incentives on the mobile network.
Yeah, and you're reading from the HIP that's about to get revised, but I think we all know what the revisions are. And I would suggest that before this video goes up, the new version will be up. And it's a very simple HIP as far as HIPs go, like compared to 51 to 53. This is like bedtime story. So go read first party source. It's not a HIP that is super confusing to people that are non-technical. I'm non-technical. So go out, read it, and I think you'll come to appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep going through the points in here. I know some of them will be revised, but I think it's just helpful for us to have a small discussion on each point just to clarify what it might mean. So the second point is discontinuing HNT emissions to HST holders, temporarily reallocating those emissions in a 70-30 split to the mobile and IoT ecosystems between the start date, which is January 1st, 2015, and the halvening date, which is August 1st, 2025, not 2015. No time travel here.
Yeah. There was a lot of discussion between IoT holders and mobile holders and all of that. And I think the IoT holders recognize the advantage of, just stopping that downward decline while mobile holders, do have sort of more to look forward to just for holding the token because of the increasing swap. So that HST is now going to go completely to the mobile treasury. And then the other concession was that the HST holders have agreed to allow that transition to occur. And I shouldn't say the HST holders because it's a decentralized group in itself, but many of the parties involved have said that they're okay making that transition as quickly as it can be implemented. So, the hope is to get the work done so that HST emissions can get cut off the HST group and start going to the mobile treasury as soon as the HIP gets passed. Obviously there might be some more implementation after that, but it would be very, very soon. So we don't actually have to wait to that January 15th date for the treasury to start accumulating that. So that's a pretty big benefit because it pretty significantly increases the final swap that mobile holders will be able to swap into HNT.
One interesting thing I think is that if you are thinking about things in terms of HNT price and you're a mobile holder, you're going to want to wait till the halvening to swap, right?
Yeah, I think that's generally true. Anybody can swap at any time. So, if you, once it's implemented, actually you can swap today based on the floor price. But once this is implemented, we'll start getting the treasury redemption. And And, let's say we go into a massive bull market and you say, oh, I want to, buy my house. You might take a little bit of a haircut on that swap, but you can swap. You don't have to wait till the halving. You can do it whenever you want. If you are willing to wait it out, there is an advantage because as people do swap, that actually improves the long-term swap rate. And that's a little bit confusing, but, the same amount of HST distribution is going to go in pretty much every day until the halvening. As people swap ahead of the halvening, the total amount of mobile left that hasn't been swapped yet is going to, decrease and decrease. So we're going to have some estimated swap rates around whatever it is, 7,000, 7,500 mobile per HNT. But let's say a whole bunch of people do decide to swap early. If you're willing to hold it out, you can actually benefit more, and that swap rate might improve.
Got it. Okay. So the third point is after the halvening date, we're going to use the utility score, just like we use it now, to allocate the full HNT emissions to the IoT and mobile networks. And those emissions would be enhanced by 2.175 million HNT from the prior HST allocation. So basically, that 31% plus the 69% is turning into 100%, right? That 100% of all the HNT is going to be divided between the IoT miners and the mobile miners as HNT instead of IoT and mobile.
Yeah, so you see about a third increase in overall bucket of rewards being allocated to the various parties that are involved with the sub-DAOs today. And so we'll still have the sub-DAOs. We're still having the division of protocol score and all that. Nothing's changing. We very much so made this hip to change as few things as possible and leave that to the future in whatever direction the sub-DAOs want to take things. So the amount going to everybody other than the investors and the, Nova will, get about a third boost after the halvening. So it should, soften that halvening quite a bit.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's just like increasing mining rewards overall, which I don't think anyone is going to complain about. And then the fourth and final point is we recognize the 4.2 million unissued HNT from the Helium L1 after HIP 20, allocate 70% to the mobile treasury and 30% to IoT builder rewards between the start date and the halvening date. Just real quick, is that also being switched to 100% mobile?
It is. Again, a lot of that comes down to getting mobile to what is seen as a digestible swap rate, because there is sort of a bright future in front of mobile as far as swap rate goes. Under the new HIP, that's going 100% there. Will make quite a bit of an impact, and something that I think is important because as Arman knows, I don't think anybody is more of a proponent of protecting the max cap than I am. And we wanted to be very careful not to touch any tokens that were burnt intentionally through the burn to mint equilibrium and everything like that. So there was a certain bucket of tokens that after HIP 20 were supposed to get minted that did not occur. And so, we looked at it and we said, okay, here's an opportunity to put those unallocated tokens to use without, breaking the logic that was created by HIP 20 and the max cap. So will it create a 2% dilution of overall helium? Yeah, but it has a pretty massive impact on the really the ability for us to get this through and the ability for us to get the entire mobile holder community, behind the simplification process.
So I think it's interesting that you guys have decided to leave governance to later HIP. You basically say that IoT and mobile shall remain, so shall VE IoT and VE mobile, and you're leaving it up to a future HIP to potentially create a future version of governance that either keeps these two tokens or relies on VEHNT as maybe creates a new form of VEHNT coupon that's delegatable to IoT or mobile with some sort of commitment, so you can still represent your commitment to that sub network. It's definitely in the spirit of not doing too many things, which I can appreciate. So overall, as James said, please go read the HIP. It's quite approachable in its language, very well rounded. I think there will be a few more revisions coming out, and I'm sure as the community discusses it, there may be even more revisions. But I don't know, guys. What do you think? I'm feeling like the momentum behind this one is pretty incredible. It's kind of like the groundwork has been laid for months, but no one was brave enough to actually do it. And now that it's been done after some initial consternation, like obviously I can't speak for everyone, right? And a lot of people, I'm sure, are still mulling this over and having their own thoughts. And I'm sure there are people who are dissenting to this and just not liking the direction it's going in. But I've been really surprised and enthused to see how much support this has gotten really quick. I mean, it seems like overnight it's practically become consensus from my view.
It's been incredible how fast it's turned around. As somebody who spends, a lot of time in the Discords, when Chris was first writing this, he got some significant pushback, trolling, etc. And some of the loudest opponents of it flipped today when Abai and James were just chatting about it with people. They turned around immediately. And, we had the mobile working group call today, and usually after the mobile working group call, everybody leaves and goes into voice chat. And, you'll have like 20 people, and there'll be some PvPing or banter about one thing or another. But today there was 40 people, maybe. And it was all thumbs up and kumbaya. And I had to ask, like, guys, is this real life? This is weird. Everybody seems to be really happy. And I myself have been sort of, maybe now is not the time. I don't know about this. Let's revisit. But like one of the other members, I'm going to quote Jeb, I think his name is JB, in trying to explain it to other people, he steelmanned himself. And then he was suddenly on board, and I have to say, I think I'm leaning in that direction as well. And seeing how everybody's reacting, I don't know. I think this is it. This is the way to go.
You were putting up a hashtag Team Do Nothing for days and weeks, and now
you
it's
yourself
suddenly different.
was on hashtag Team Do Nothing, and I thought that was the way to go. But again, just seeing the way it's taken over in a day. Yeah,
I think a whole bunch of people, even that were involved with the HIP, and there's people, behind the scenes as well that, and myself being one of them, have come around to these concepts over time. And, Arman knows, and I said earlier that, like, I was on team, bring some burn to mobile to start, and then the deeper I thought about it, the more I went, the more I thought about it, the more I went, there's a lot of problems with that. So it helped that, this was not, like a fanboy HIP that, like, somebody who just, like, came out, then it was like 100% behind it right out of the gate. It went through a lot of these little revisions, and it went through a lot of people that had to change their mind, to even get it to where it is. And today's discussion was probably the most, I flipped on this one, I've ever seen from a HIP. So I think, and some of that was, a lot of that was, the version that Arman was just reading, and people saying, oh, well, what about this? In the community, and sort of coming to consensus around these key changes. So, it's not like we came out with this perfect HIP that just had to convince people. Like, the community did what the community is supposed to do, and the community came together, and we, the mind of the many was better than the mind of the few, and we I think polished it. I'm sure it's still
not even an official HIP yet.
Yeah,
it's not. Yeah,
like I know probably we're like waiting for
and there were some very, very vocal people who were just against it, and within a day they were like, "Oh yeah, No.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not
Cool.
going to
Let's
name
go.
names, but there were some very, very vocal people.
It really does. Yeah, but it doesn't matter who.
Yeah. No, and that's helped.
They went.
And those people helped us get to where it should have been.
Yeah, and a lot of people just felt like, so long as I have some input, this is the way to go.
And this is what I believe is genuinely the spirit of the helium community. I don't think you survive in this community unless you're willing to basically endure a roller coaster ride, right? Or just be willing to change your position really hard on something, because we've had helium is basically just a series of really, really polarizing decisions, one after another, right? It's just the latest in a series of tough decisions. To James's point from earlier, like, centralized companies move much faster than decentralized projects. I genuinely think helium is one of the, if not the most agile large communities in crypto, because we are constantly willing to do the hard and painful thing and pivot. And this is the hallmark of successful startups and businesses as well, is being ready to pivot and move on to the next thing when the previous thing is proving to not work out. And I think this is a case of that. We all have collectively realized that the multiple token model is proving to not work out because of the difficulty in understanding it creates, and the fiendish obsession many of us have developed over the specifics of this, which we are now realizing is just a massive distraction and isn't really gaining us anything at all.
One of the best compliments I think we can pay to the helium community, or ourselves, but the community in general, I'm not actually referring to anybody in this room right now, is the amount of people who are willing to make a sacrifice essentially for the greater good. It takes me back. I find myself taken aback sometimes, and I think part of it is because the carrot, or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is so big that a lot of people know that, oh yeah, sometimes these things just have to be done, and when we do them, we get to where we're going a bit faster, and when we get there, it might be pretty good. And so I think that's one of the big positives, that there are a lot of people who are willing to make sacrifice in good faith, and it's pretty incredible.
I agree. Yeah, I see that over and over again.
I have a shelf of CBRS units that speaks to that, and I'm a big proponent of deciding that we don't no longer need to go that direction, and focus on.
I got a closet full of IoT hotspots.
Yeah, I too.
A bunch of Bobcats and a bunch of secret bits.
Yeah. Deep in for you, all of us just have like a closet that we don't show our wives and girlfriends, just filled with a lot.
No, some of them are my girlfriends.
My old shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously.
Well,
thank you guys.
Sentiment.
Thank you guys. That's a beautiful note to end on. As our closet, it's all having closets of hotspots if we've been around for long enough. But no, seriously, there couldn't be more things to be excited about. I'm ready to hopefully get past this. I hope we can come to consensus. I hope we can pass a vote, and then we can focus on building out this Wi-Fi network and continuing to expand the supply side and the demand side. Get some brownfield hotspots going. Offload some new carriers. It's lovely. There's so much awesome stuff that we can talk about in the coming days and weeks. Mexico is going to be huge. Telefonica, it's just everything. It's happening. Like all the stuff that we've been building towards for years and years is now occurring. The fact that you can go put up a hotspot and get selected for carrier offload and earn real revenue that's not dependent on the token price is insane. The fact that revenue drives HNT burn is insane. And the fact that you can do it with 2/3 of all the cellular customers in the country is insane. So really looking forward to chatting with you guys and with others in the community about all that stuff. And for everyone who wants to follow this HIP that we've discussed today, hopefully it will have a channel soon in Discord. It's currently called HIP 666, kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm sure it'll get a real number.
No, I think it has a real number already. It's going to be HIP 138.
Oh my God! And there we go, real time development
and we'll
here.
dub that over if it ends up being something else.
Yeah.
There you go, some post production. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Thanks for this discussion. It's been awesome. And yeah, any closing thoughts?
Follow the Dune with us. If you're not excited yet, that'll get you excited. You'll become addicted. Every like 3 days, we hit a new all-time high. It's friggin' awesome. And just let's focus on what is so friggin' cool about what we're doing, and let's stop focusing on all the other crap that's distracting us. And let's get this through. That's all I gotta say.
Matt, any closing thoughts?
You can just put up the animated GIF or GIF of Ron Paul over lasers going, "It's happening!" Because that's where we're at. I think getting the tokens back on track and getting everybody pointed in the right direction, building out the network is just what we need to be focusing on. So, yeah, good times ahead.
Agreed. Yeah, and the core developers are on board. So, if this passes a vote, it will be implemented, and I couldn't be happier. So, thanks, guys. This has been great. Looking forward to
thanks
next
for coming
time.
out, James.
Talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.
All righty, take care.
Thank you for tuning into the Hotspot. If you love our content, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to maximize your impact, leave your honest review on Apple Podcasts. Your support helps us reach more listeners and educate them about the Helium Network.